Was there a real-life League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in the 1930s? It's a fun thought. The idea of a secret group made up of brilliant minds and brave adventurers, all working together to solve big problems. The fictional league has characters like Alan Quatermain, Captain Nemo, the Invisible Man. They come from different stories, but they team up for a common cause. This idea is powerful. It makes you wonder if anything like it ever happened for real, especially in a time like the 1930s. The 1930s were a wild time. The world was changing fast. There was a Great Depression, which hit everyone hard. But there was also amazing progress in science and technology, new ways to travel, new ideas about the universe, new threats emerging. It felt like anything could happen, good things and bad things. So it makes sense to ask if a group of super talented people got together to steer things. Or maybe just to explore the unknown. We're not looking for a secret lair under London. We're looking for the spirit of it. We want to see if extraordinary people working at the edge of human possibility were around then, and if they somehow connected. The fictional league brings together very different kinds of people. A hunter, a scientist, a master of disguise. They each bring a unique skill. This makes them stronger as a group. For real life, we can't expect the exact same mix, but we can look for individuals who fit those archetypes. Were there people who were truly exceptional in their fields? People who changed the world with their smarts or their courage? And were there places or situations that brought these people closer, even if not into a formal league? That's the question. The 1930s were a time when heroes, both public and quiet, were very much needed. It was a time of invention, a time of discovery, a time of dark clouds gathering. All these things create a stage for extraordinary people to step forward. We will explore different kinds of extraordinary individuals. We will see if their paths crossed, or if their work just existed side by side, but with similar goals. It's about finding the real-world echo of that grand fictional idea. Not a literal league, but the human spirit that makes us imagine such a thing. That spirit of brilliance, daring, and making a difference. And so, we look at the facts. We look at the people, we look at the decade, we try to find the connections. The secret meanings in fiction are exciting. But the real connections, the ones that happened over letters in university halls or during dangerous expeditions, those can be just as exciting. They tell us something about how the world really works and how amazing people can truly be. The 1930s gave us plenty of people who could be called extraordinary gentlemen or gentlewomen. They were pushing the limits of what humans knew and what humans could do. One big area was science and innovation. This was a time when the very building blocks of the universe were being understood better. And new technologies were taking shape, technologies that would change everything. Think about physics. Albert Einstein was already a legend. He had his big ideas about relativity. But even in the 1930s, he was still active, he was thinking, he was writing, he was talking to other scientists. He was in America by then, having fled Nazi Germany. His presence alone was like a beacon for intellectual pursuit. He wasn't working in a secret lab for a league, but his mind was certainly extraordinary, and he was influencing a whole generation of physicists. Then you have people working on the atom. This was a really critical time. Scientists were figuring out how to split atoms. They didn't fully understand the power of it yet, but they were getting close. Leo Szilard was one of these brilliant minds. He was a Hungarian-born physicist. He came up with the idea of a nuclear chain reaction in 1933. He was walking across a London street when it hit him. This wasn't just an idea. It was a blueprint for atomic energy and for the atomic bomb. He even tried to keep his discovery a secret for a while. He knew how dangerous it could be. This was not a formal league, but it was a scientist making a discovery that literally changed the course of human history. That Szilard later worked with Einstein to warn President Roosevelt about the potential for an atomic bomb. Their paths did cross, not in a league, but in a shared understanding of a monumental scientific development. Another name that comes to mind is Robert Oppenheimer. While his biggest fame came later with the Manhattan Project in the 1940s, his foundational work was happening in the 1930s. He was a brilliant theoretical physicist. He was teaching at Berkeley. He was attracting top students. He was building one of the leading schools of theoretical physics in the United States. He wasn't inventing specific things, but he was shaping the minds who would. He was a conductor of scientific thought, a leader in the intellectual sense. He was gathering extraordinary minds around him, even if it was a university department and not a secret society. And then there's the very early days of computing. Alan Turing was a British mathematician. His work in the 1930s laid the groundwork for modern computers. In 1936, he published a paper called Uncomputable Numbers. It introduced the idea of the Turing machine. This was a theoretical model of computation. It showed how a simple machine could solve any mathematical problem. This was years before actual computers existed as we know them. Turing's work was highly abstract, but it was incredibly important. It showed the world how machines could process information. He was working in universities, he was working with other mathematicians, they were pushing the boundaries of logic and computation. His mind was definitely extraordinary, and his ideas shaped a future no one could truly imagine at the time. These scientists, they weren't wearing costumes, they weren't fighting supervillains. But they were doing something just as profound. They were fighting ignorance, they were pushing the boundaries of what humans knew about the universe. They were creating tools and ideas that would redefine human civilization. Their league, if you want to call it that, was more an international network of minds. Scientists wrote to each other. They published papers, they attended conferences. They built on each other's work, they challenged each other. Sometimes they collaborated directly, like Einstein and Szilard trying to warn the government. Sometimes they just influenced each other from afar, but the collective brainpower was immense. And it was focused on understanding, on discovery, and sometimes on the heavy responsibility that came with that knowledge. This intellectual collaboration, this global meeting of minds, was as close as you get to a real scientific league in the 1930s. Their work was the real magic, their ideas, the real power. Beyond the labs and lecture halls, they were people who pushed the limits of the physical world. These were the explorers, the adventurers. The 1930s still had parts of the globe that were largely unknown or very difficult to reach. And new technologies were making these daring journeys possible. These individuals embodied the spirit of the adventurer, the type you'd expect in a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Take aviation. The 1930s was the golden age of flight. And airplanes were still relatively new. Every long-distance flight was an adventure. Every record broken was a huge deal. Amelia Earhart is probably the most famous. She was an American aviation pioneer. In 1932, she became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. This was a massive achievement. It took incredible skill, courage, and determination. She wasn't just flying, she was inspiring. She was showing what was possible, and she was doing it in a very public way. Her ambition was to fly around the world. She attempted it in 1937, and she disappeared during that journey. Her story is one of ultimate adventure and tragedy. She was absolutely an extraordinary gentlewoman of her time. Then there was Charles Lindbergh. He had made his famous solo Atlantic flight in 1927, but in the 1930s, he was still a very prominent figure. He was involved in aviation research and development. He was flying. He was pushing the boundaries of aircraft design and performance. While his later political views are controversial, in the 1930s, he was still seen by many as a symbol of American ingenuity and daring. He was exploring air routes. He was advising on aviation technology. He was, in his way, a pioneer who made the world feel smaller and more connected. Howard Hughes also fits here. He was an American businessman, investor, and film director. But he was also a passionate aviator and aerospace engineer. In the 1930s, he set multiple world air speed records. He designed and built his own aircraft. He flew them himself. He pushed the limits of what planes could do. He was eccentric, yes, but his talent and drive in aviation were undeniable. He was constantly experimenting, constantly innovating. He combined the mind of an engineer with the spirit of an adventurer. He was like a real-life inventor-pilot character from a pulp novel. And it wasn't just in the air. People were still exploring the coldest, most remote places on Earth. Admiral Richard Byrd was an American naval officer and explorer. He led several expeditions to the Antarctic in the 1930s. These were massive undertakings. They involved scientific research. They involved surviving in extreme conditions. Byrd and his teams mapped parts of Antarctica. They collected scientific data. He even spent 5 months alone at an advanced base, facing isolation and danger. These expeditions were not just about planting a flag. They were about expanding human knowledge of the planet. They required meticulous planning, specialized equipment, and incredible bravery from everyone involved. These individuals, the aviators, and the polar explorers, they were not working in a secret organization. But they were all part of a larger, unspoken community. They were often in competition with each other, trying to break records or reach new places first. But they also learned from each other. They shared knowledge about aircraft design, navigation, survival technique. Their exploits were widely reported. They inspired millions. They showed the world that human courage and ingenuity could overcome huge obstacles. They were, in their own right, a league of daring individuals, a league defined by their shared ambition to push human limits and explore the unknown. Their arenas were the sky, the poles, the depths of the ocean sometimes, and their stories are just as thrilling as any fiction. They made the impossible seem possible, and they did it for real in the very decade we are looking at. Their impact was not on secret plots, but on public imagination and the advancement of human reach. The 1930s was also a decade of rising global tension. It was a time when nations were maneuvering, when ideologies clashed, when the whispers of war were starting to become shouts. This kind of environment needed sharp minds, people who could understand complex political situations, people who could gather information, people who could strategize. These were the real-life equivalents of the masterminds or detectives in a fictional league. They were the spies, the strategists, the key thinkers. Intelligence gathering was certainly happening. It wasn't always formal. It wasn't always as organized as it would become during World War II. But countries were definitely trying to figure out what other countries were planning. Diplomats weren't just shaking hands. Many were also gathering information. They were observing. They were analyzing. They were trying to piece together the global puzzle. Code breaking was also an emerging field. Before the famous Enigma machine of We, there were people working on early forms of cryptography and cryptanalysis. These were mathematicians and linguists. They worked for governments. Their work was highly secret. They were trying to break the codes of other nations, and they were trying to create unbreakable codes for their own nations. These individuals were often quiet figures. They worked in the shadows, but their intellectual power was immense. Their ability to decipher secrets could change the course of events. They were the hidden heroes. The silent protectors. Their work was truly extraordinary. It required a unique kind of brilliance. Think about people like William Stephenson, a Canadian businessman who later became a key British intelligence officer during WE. In the 1930s, he was already involved in intelligence work. He was providing information to Winston Churchill about German rearmament. He was seeing the dangers ahead. He was acting on it. He wasn't part of a formal league, but he was a single, determined individual working to counter a growing threat. He had a network of contacts. He had a sharp mind. He saw what others didn't, or maybe what others didn't want to see. And there were the strategists. These were the military planners, the political advisors, or people like Winston Churchill himself. In the 1930s, he was often a lone voice. He was warning about the dangers of Nazism. He was advocating for rearmament. He was studying the geopolitical landscape. He was analyzing. He was writing, he was speaking, his ideas were often dismissed, but he was thinking strategically on a grand scale. He was seeing the coming storm. He was trying to prepare his nation for it. His was more his circle of trusted advisors and informants, people who shared his concerns and his vision. In the realm of psychology and social science, people were also trying to understand human behavior and societal forces. Some thinkers like Sigmund Freud, though his most groundbreaking work was earlier, was still influential. He was trying to understand the human mind. People like John Maynard Keynes were trying to understand economies. Their insights, while not secret plots, were vital for navigating the turbulent 1930s. They were giving leaders the tools to understand the world, even if those leaders didn't always listen. The real league here was a more fluid network. It was made of individuals in different roles. And diplomats, intelligence officers, codebreakers, political figures, strategists, they often operated independently. But their work was interconnected. They were all trying to make sense of a confusing and dangerous world. They were trying to protect their nation's interests, and sometimes they were trying to prevent a global catastrophe. Their efforts were often clandestine, their successes unseen, their failures sometimes catastrophic. But their minds were definitely extraordinary. They were the ones playing a very real, very high-stakes game. And their actions, though not as dramatic as the fictional heroes, had huge real-world consequences. This hidden world of strategic thinking and intelligence gathering was a true battleground for extraordinary minds in the 1930s. So, was there a real-life League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in the 1930s? When you look at all the facts, the answer is no. Not in the way the stories show it. There wasn't a secret society with a formal roster. There wasn't a hidden headquarters. No one was bringing together a hunter, a scientist, and a sea captain into one official team to fight a supervillain. The world isn't usually that neat. But, and this is a big but, the spirit of such a league absolutely existed. The 1930s was full of truly extraordinary individuals. They were men and women who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and capability. They were brilliant, they were brave, they were often unconventional, they were the real-life counterparts to those fictional characters. We saw them in science. People like Einstein and Szilard, they were unraveling the universe's secrets. They were laying the groundwork for technologies that would change the world forever. They weren't formal allies in a league, but their work was interconnected. They influenced each other. Sometimes they even collaborated directly, like when they tried to warn the president about the atomic bomb. This was a global community of brilliant minds. They shared information, they built on each other's discoveries. This informal network of scientific genius was very powerful. We also saw them in exploration and adventure. Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, Howard Hughes, Richard Byrd. These people flew faster and farther than ever before. They explored the most remote corners of the Earth. They inspired millions. Their league was more a shared ambition to conquer the unknown. They might have been competitors, but they were all part of the same human quest. They showed what courage and determination could achieve, and then there were the hidden figures. The spies, the strategists, the codebreakers. People like William Stephenson and the dedicated analysts working in the shadows. They were trying to understand a dangerous world. They were trying to protect their nations. Their work was secret. It was often lonely, but their minds were extraordinary. Their efforts, even if unseen, had huge impacts on world events. Their league was a dispersed network of intelligence and insight, working behind the scenes. What all these individuals had in common was a drive to do something exceptional. They weren't just doing their jobs, they were pushing limits, they were seeing things differently. They were taking risks, and their combined efforts, though not coordinated by a single leader, moved the world forward. Or sometimes tried to prevent it from going backward. The fictional League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a fun fantasy. It gives us a neat package, but real life is messier. It's more complex, and in many ways it's more interesting. The real League of the 1930s was not a single group. It was a whole era, an era filled with individual brilliance, with daring acts, with profound discoveries. These people worked in labs. They flew planes. They sailed ships. They sat in quiet rooms deciphering codes. They debated in parliaments. Their paths might not have crossed in a dramatic secret meeting, but their collective impact was enormous. They truly were the extraordinary gentlemen and gentlewomen of their time. They shaped the world we live in. They dealt with the challenges of their decade with ingenuity and courage. They lived up to the spirit of the fictional league, even if they never held a membership card.